I thought buying a small cabin in the countryside would finally give me some peace. The property sat at the end of a quiet gravel road, surrounded by tall pine trees, open fields, and a narrow creek. There were no neighbors close enough to bother me, no traffic, and no city noise. Just the cabin, the land, and silence. I had purchased the property legally, and I had every document to prove it. The deed was recorded, the property boundaries were clearly marked, and I had even hired a surveyor before closing. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. Then, one Saturday morning, I heard engines coming up my driveway. I stepped outside and saw 2 black SUVs approaching. 3 men wearing matching security uniforms got out. The man in front walked toward me and said, "Sir, you need to leave this property immediately." I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. I pointed around me. "This is my property." He pulled out a tablet and said, "According to the HOA records, you're trespassing." That was when I realized something strange was happening. I told him I wasn't part of their HOA and that my property had never been subject to their neighborhood rules. He smiled and said, "That's not what our records show." Then he handed me a notice demanding that I leave. I refused. The guards became more aggressive, insisting they had authority to remove me. But they made one mistake. They assumed I didn't know what I owned. I went inside the cabin, grabbed my property documents, and came back outside. I showed them the deed. The legal description matched my property. Then I showed them the recent survey. The boundary line ran directly along the gravel road. The guards looked at each other. But instead of leaving, their supervisor arrived. He told me the HOA had purchased development rights around the area years earlier and claimed my cabin was inside their community. I asked him one simple question. "Show me where my property is listed under your HOA." He couldn't. Instead, he told me the HOA president would handle it. That afternoon, the HOA president arrived with 2 more people. She walked onto my porch like she owned the place. She told me I had violated community rules by keeping an old truck near the cabin and by refusing to display an HOA access permit. I told her I didn't need an HOA permit to live on land I owned. She became furious. Then she made the threat that changed everything. She said, "If you don't cooperate, we'll have your property access blocked." I calmly asked her to put everything in writing. She did, and that was exactly what I needed. That evening, I contacted my title company and sent them the HOA's documents. Within a day, something interesting came back. The HOA's map showed my cabin inside their development, but the official county survey showed something completely different. The HOA map had been drawn using an outdated parcel boundary. My property had been separated from the original development decades earlier. In other words, the HOA wasn't enforcing rules on my property. They were using an old map and pretending it was still valid. The next morning, I went to the county records office. I pulled the original parcel documents. There it was, a recorded boundary adjustment from years earlier. My cabin property was clearly separated from the HOA control land. I made copies of everything. Then I sent the HOA one final letter. It included the deed, the survey, the recorded boundary documents, and a demand that their guards immediately stop entering my property. The response was almost unbelievable. They claimed their guards had simply made a mistake, but I wasn't satisfied. I asked them to confirm in writing that I was the sole owner of the property and that the HOA had no authority over it. After several days of silence, their attorney finally responded. He confirmed exactly that. The guards were removed from the road. The HOA stopped sending notices, and the peaceful cabin became peaceful again. A few weeks later, I installed a small sign at the entrance. Private property, no HOA access. I didn't put it there to start a fight. I put it there because after buying a place with my own money, I wanted everyone to understand one simple thing. Owning property means knowing exactly where your rights begin. And when someone tries to tell you that you don't own what you legally own, don't argue louder. Check the documents. Because sometimes the truth isn't in someone's opinion. It's in the deed. If you enjoyed this HOA story, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.